Welcome to Broadview United here at the Arbutus site for this, the fourth Sunday in the season of Lent, March 14th, 2021. We're glad that you're able to join us for this series as we continue to look at the world through the lens of others, from our place of privilege to understanding what it means to see the world through the lens of those who are perhaps more marginalized, and through that process of decolonizing. As part of this process, we continue with what we always have done by acknowledging that we're on the lands of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Lekwungen-speaking folks who have lived and worked and made this their home for centuries. We acknowledge our place on their lands, and we give thanks for their stewardship of it as we walk this road of decolonizing and reconciliation. You may be watching this actually on the Sunday or on some other time, but just a reminder that on this Sunday at 11 a.m., Daylight Savings Time, we will be having our congregational meeting in order to vote on the building redesign proposal dated February the 26th, 2021. We hope that you will join us for that meeting. And so with that, as we begin our time together, I'm going to invite Margaret to light our candle as we begin our worship time.
Welcome. As we light our candle this morning, I invite you to picture this light of God which has no end and no beginning. This light of God which embraces everybody, irrespective of their gender identity, who they love and how they love. This love which is so inclusive that it tears down walls and builds community. So on this day, I hope you find a place within the circle of this love, for we are beloved and we belong to God. Thanks be to God. Amen.
You with the sad eyes, don't be discouraged, though I realize it's hard to take courage in a world full of people. You can lose sight of it all, and the darkness inside you make you feel so small. But I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. Don't be afraid to let them show. True colors, true colors. show me a smile. Don't be unhappy. Can't remember when I last saw you laughing. If this world makes you crazy, and you've taken all you can bear, call me up because you know I'll be there. I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. Don't be afraid to let them show your true colors. True colors are beautiful, just like a rainbow. I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. Don't be afraid to let them show. True colors, true colors, true colors, true colors are beautiful, like a rainbow.
As I was doing a bit of research for this Sunday, I came across a resource that was put together by the Student Christian Movement of Canada. And the title of this resource is Glory to the Gender Bending God. And I thought, that's a beautiful way to lead off our prayers today. So will you join me now in prayer? Glory to the gender bending God, whose identity encompasses all the ways in which we come to know ourselves as human beings. Glory to the gender-bending God, who evolves in us as we evolve, who grows in us as we fully come to know and appreciate the gender identities and diversity of form and expression that constitute the complete body of Jesus. Glory to the gender-bending source of love, whose love is so vast and deep and authentic that it will not rest until we live and move and inhabit the same space as God's radical love. Glory to the gender-bending source of love, who embodies a love that accepts, a love that does not pronounce judgment, a love whose lightness is rooted in compassion and the deep respect that recognizes each person for who they are becoming, and who we collectively are when we sit together at God's table. Glory to the gender-bending community of faith, who knows we still have a long road to travel, and which must begin with a deep listening and respect for those voices who do not identify as cisgender. Glory to the gender-bending community of faith, who knows and appreciates the space that opens in love, where together we lay down our assumptions and simply step into the place of learning and loving and living together. O Holy One, on this day when the sunshine pours into this sanctuary and into our hearts and lives like a gift of healing and hope, we give thanks for the unfolding of God's Spirit in action, for the flowers that brighten the Lenten journey, for the old growth forests of BC that need our protection and advocacy, and for the small acts of kindness that say, I love you and I care what you are going through. Dear friends, I would invite you now to name and pray the gifts for which you are grateful this day. We raise up our concerns for those in our circles who are hurting for any reason, for all who have pain that is lodged so deep it seems to consume them from within, for any who doubt their own capabilities, merit, worth, and divine beauty and loveliness, for any who are grieving endings and beginnings, and the space that inhabits all the in-between moments of life's transitions. We lift up our prayers for any who are at their wits' end due to isolation, waiting for the pandemic to be over and wondering how much longer they can hold on. Friends, I invite you now to name your own concerns and prayers for yourself and for the community, for our new church, and for God's wondrous world. As we prepare to meet Sunday as the body of Broadview United to vote on the building reproposal package, we lift up the hours of work offered in trust, creativity, and faith from the members of the committee and the board, and all who have given their time to engage the process with care and respect. We are grateful, O God, for the passion and the vision that has brought us to this place in time, and we give thanks to your leading. O holy gender-bending God, as we head into this week, we offer ourselves to you, to each other, and to your world, in service, in love, and in all the places which hold infinite possibilities. Amen and amen.
I look out the window into my mind. Reflections of the fears I know I've left behind. I step out of the ordinary. I can feel my soul ascending. I'm on my way, can't stop me now. You can do the same. What have you done today to make me feel proud? What have you done today to make you feel still so many answers I don't know. Realize the question is how we grow. To step out of the ordinary, I can feel my soul ascending. I'm on my way, can't stop me now. You can do the same. What have you done today to make you feel proud? What have you done today to make you feel proud? You could be so many people if you'd make the break for freedom. What have you done to make yourself feel proud? We need a change, do it today. I can feel my spirit rising. You can do it today. I can feel my spirit rising. We need a change, so do it today. I can feel my spirit rising. We need a change, do it today. I can feel my spirit rising. What have you done today to make you feel proud? What have you done today to make you feel proud? You could make a break for freedom. Tell me, what have you done today? What have you done today to make you feel proud?
For our scripture today, we return to the Gospel of Matthew from the chapter 26, verses 6 to 13. And this is the anointing of Jesus at Bethany. Now, while Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of costly ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when the disciples saw it, they were angry and said, "Why this waste? For this ointment could have been sold for a large sum, and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, very aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. By pouring this ointment on my body, she has prepared me for burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever this good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." May we find wisdom and sustenance in these words. Amen.
Today's interview is through the lens of gender diversity. And even that term might feel new or unfamiliar to you, in addition to things like being cisgendered. All those concepts can feel strange and unusual, especially for those of us who occupy a place of privilege. I was very touched in this interview at the willingness of Kath and Jade in the sharing of some of their own story, in their experience, and in their vulnerability of what it means to live in the world, and from the gracefulness and gentleness in which they engage with us this day. So with open hearts, and open minds. Let us hear their words.
Welcome, the two of you. I'm delighted and very humbled that you are able to join us this day. And so I'm going to begin by asking you each to identify yourself, and we'll go from there. Who wants to start?
I can. My name is Jade. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as trans femme, trans non-binary, which means that for me, I identify as being on the feminine end of the spectrum, but that it's more of a spectrum than a kind of black-white situation.
And I'm Kath. My pronouns are they, them, and I identify as gender fluid. And so that means that my gender sometimes shifts between masculine and feminine, but also a lack of gender sometimes.
And so that's a lot often for folks to take in. For lots of folks, even the language is kind of new and part of a changing vocabulary and vernacular. And so what is it like to live in a world where, for some folks, even the whole notion of what is your pronoun or how do you identify is not even on their radar?
It can be really confusing at times to be in a situation where you aren't feeling recognized and want to educate people, but they're kind of unaware of it from the start, especially around the terms cis and transgender. Their roots are actually Latin-based, and so these are terms that have been used in English for a while, specifically in chemistry. We talk about cis and trans isomers. And so cis isomers just have one arrangement, and trans is a different arrangement of the exact same atoms, but it ends up being having different properties. And so because we use this terminology all the time, it's really hard to explain that to other people that have never heard of this terminology before when it comes in relation to gender, which has happened more recently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's interesting. It's something that has been both, learning more terminology has been both freeing in terms of a better ability to explain myself and who I am in the world, and also probably more confusing at the same time, right? I imagine that there are many people who I interact with who don't know exactly what I mean when I say that I'm non-binary and trans femme. And sometimes I discover that I'm introducing myself and then spending 5 minutes explaining what it means to say that, which I guess negates the value of shortening trans feminine to trans femme. But it's at the same time the growth in language and in words for these experiences over the last years and decades has been an important thing for the community and an important thing for me. I mean, I think back even 10, 15 years ago when I was involved in trans activism and didn't realize I was trans yet. But it was, at that point, there were still very few words for it. There was just a kind of a handful of words to describe sort of a large number of experiences within them. And language has evolved over the intervening years to bring much more space to fluidity into that spectrum of experiences that existed for gender.
So what I hear you saying is that the expansion of language meant that the continuum of male-female has suddenly now broadened. So there's all this other stuff in between.
There is, and I think the one thing I would say is that that's my experience of it. And I know that there are also people who would say that they identify as binary trans folk, that they would be, and somebody who maybe was assigned male at birth and now identifies as female, or vice versa, and who in their experience still have a very kind of there are a couple different places to be, and I'm here, not here, sort of thing. And so I think people have their own experiences of gender and of the fluidity of it, or stableness of it, or the spectrum and the width and gradations in that spectrum. But for me, that's how it feels to me.
So for people who aren't familiar, you've given kind of a chemistry definition, Kath, but I'm wondering, when someone says they're cisgender, what does that mean?
So what that typically means is that you feel as the gender that you were assigned at birth. And that a lot of people go through life not understanding that term in relation to who they are, because that's just the assumption that we all have built into how we build our societies. And so it's different. Identifying as something other than cisgender is something that you need to learn about to even be able to describe what's going on. But then you also need to talk to the people around you and let them know, because it's not something that they're going to inherently see from the outset.
So one can't assume what one's gender identity is by how they appear on the surface.
Yeah, and so that is what a lot of people in the community refer to as gender expression. So how someone dresses, how they talk, what they wear. That's kind of the gender expression, which can be different than their gender identity. And so that's why it's always better to ask in a, way that is relevant to you. So, what pronouns do you use? What can I use for you? How do you identify is what happens on a common day-to-day basis. A lot of other questions, unless you're getting to know this person as family, they're not as relevant.
And you're being kind, but I think what you're trying to say are inappropriate.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there is an element. It's sort of like saying, so, tell me about your favorite sex position. Like, there is an element where there are boundaries about what you can casually ask people about who they are and how they identify and where they are on their journey. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's a hard piece of a process. And people sometimes think they're being supportive, but sometimes what they're asking or the way they're asking can feel intrusive. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Definitely. And it also depends on your relationship with the person. Like if it's someone you've known for years, then, slowly build a conversation and then ask, like, can I ask you this, or are you okay answering this question? Because it is important to talk about this with other people. And if they know that you're receptive to hearing their answer, they're far more likely to answer honestly and truthfully. But also, in a sense, be gentle with people around the fact that they may not fully understand or be able to describe it yet either.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is there's a piece that people shouldn't be intrusive about questions they wouldn't ask somebody who does appear and present in the gender that they are assumed to have. But also there is room for curiosity, and that's okay to a point, right? Like I think sometimes people also hold back from asking because they don't know what's appropriate to ask. And so out of overabundance of caution there, they don't talk about it or they don't ask about it, and they just sort of awkwardly work around it by using the person's name a whole lot and trying to avoid pronouns entirely or something like that. So I think there's just, if people are coming at it with a good heart and with a honest and open intent of trying to do better and to understand and to connect with somebody, I think 9 times out of 10 people are going to respond well to that.
And so is there like in some ways what I heard you say, one could almost say preface a question by saying, I'm not actually even sure if this is appropriate to ask, and please tell me if it's not, and then kind of engage. the curiosity or the question that way? Or is there another way that people begin to kind of check, now we're into privilege, their privilege about the kind of conversations and the power they have in that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if there's an exact other way. Think about that.
It's definitely a good starting place.
Yeah.
And I think it's different how you would ask that question with different people. And I think there is a level of how well do you know this person to begin with? Even before you could really ask many of the questions that often come up. I highly recommend searching online. I know not everyone is familiar with the internet, but there are lots of resources out there to learn some of the basics and some of even the more in-depth questions. So if you know that someone identifies a certain way, you can go search that term up and see how other people use it, even if that may not be how that specific person in your life uses it. It's a good starting place to be like, okay, I think I get where that's coming from.
So part of the way I'm hearing you say of checking one's privilege is to take some responsibility of doing some of your own education and not expecting that others will do that for me all the time. Yeah. So in your experience, how has the assumptions that society makes about people being cisgendered had an effect on you?
I mean, I guess one thing for me has been around the consequences and things like that, or the assumed consequences around even choosing to live as yourself as a trans person. So when I first started grappling with this, and I came to this understanding of myself later in my life than some people do. I was in my mid-30s by the time I was really engaging with this. And one of the things I had to go through in figuring out whether I was going to live in my honest self was figuring out whether I was comfortable with the risk it was going to place and what I might lose. I went through a period of feeling like my choice was being willing to risk losing my job, risk losing my partner, my family, that these are things that people who are cisgender don't go through, right? You don't think about, if I'm going to walk out the door in a suit and continue to call myself a man, I'm going to put at jeopardy my ability to do the work that I love, or to be with the person that I love, or with my child. And that for me was very much, when I decided to come out publicly and live as myself, I went into work and I work in a public facing kind of job. And so I went into work and let my boss know and said that I had a 6-month plan for somebody to be able to take over for me, and that I understood I probably wasn't going to be able to continue to keep doing this work. And I'm very lucky. I am one of the minority of people who was able to have my mind changed on that. I received a great deal of support from the people around me and positive reaction from the people around me. And I was able to continue to do the job that I love. I was able to continue in relationship with a partner who I love, and in a family with a child who I love. And unfortunately, that is by far the minority experience in the trans community. It's an important one for me to share, because I think I came in also with this idea that everybody lost a lot when they came out. And so I want to share the fact that it doesn't always end that way. But I also want to recognize the fact that for a lot of people it does, and especially for trans women and for trans women of color in particular. Violence is often far too much a part of their reality and of them, the price that they paid for choosing to be themselves. And so I think that's unfortunately a sort of sad reality of a world that continues to privilege a cisgender experience of life.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Kath?
Being younger in general, I have had a different experience with different things. For me, one thing that has come up recently is actually around databasing and grant money. I used to work in STEM education, and so I would do workshops, and we would report back on, what the workshop was and who was in the workshop. And one of those things would be a breakdown of the gender of the youth that had been there. And so I had to sit down and make assumptions about how many girls and boys were in the class. And that was really hard for me because I'm like, I don't want to put assumptions on these young kids, even though this is entirely behind the scenes and entirely not in front of them. But the reason we had to do that was because some of our funding was for underrepresented groups, being women and girls, as well as other, Indigenous and other different types of diversities. And it recently came at me again when I was applying for a co-op job. I got an email from my co-op advisor to my prospective employer, which was a small startup. And the co-op advisor in the email was like, here's, this grant that you can apply for to support what would be my funding for my employment. And this grant was specifically for underrepresented groups being disabilities, Indigenous, and women in STEM. And it was listed and highlighted. And I had to sit looking at that email being like, do I say anything about this? This is a startup who doesn't have a lot of funding. I am an underrepresented group, being of a diverse gender, but at the same time, it's not one of the ones listed. And so that's a really awkward place of society being in a place that's different than legal terminology that's currently used. Even though the meaning behind that is similar, it's not caught up yet.
And does that experience happen a lot in kind of even just basic application forms when there's only two choices that are given in terms of the boxes to check off?
Definitely, that happens a lot of the time. It's amazing when you see a form that actually says, preferred name, and you're like, perfect. I can just use the name that I go by every day, and I don't need to put down my legal name that's on my certificate because I haven't changed that yet. I'm in the process of my transition, and I don't know how much further I will go in terms of my changing my documentation. But this even happened over the phone with me with a healthcare provider. We were going through the list of questions, and they came to gender. And there was just a pause on my end because I'm like, I don't know what to tell you in my head. And the receptionist on the other end says the one on the card. And I was just like, okay, I can answer that question. That is a clear answer I can give you. And it was just amazing how clarifying that made it easier on my end to answer the question.
So we're starting to get into the area about what's kind of helpful for people to know about your experience of being gender fluid, but wondering what else you want folks to know about the experience of being gender fluid and how the place of privilege can be both a stumbling block or a support.
So I specifically identify as gender fluid, and it is different than being trans or non-binary in and of itself. I use those as umbrella terms underneath or on top of gender fluid. And for me, what it in an everyday setting, it means that my gender expression changes, and sure, everyone goes through changes in their style, but sometimes mine can happen quite suddenly. I remember when I was first realizing what was going on, I would get dressed in the morning, and by lunchtime, I would feel incredibly uncomfortable in the clothing I was in, and I couldn't understand why. And so, either being gentle with people in terms of like, asking if they need something, do you need a break? Do you need to go home right now and get changed? Like if you're in a work setting and it's uncomfortable for people. Around bathrooms, that's always a really awkward one. Because if you're around a group of people all the time, they kind of expect you to be using the same set of washrooms all the time. And so it's awesome when there is a gender neutral washroom, because then people don't ask questions as much. But then there's always if it's recently been put into an institution, which is more common these days because it is something that's new, it's like, okay, so who is using the gender neutral washroom? And that is also awkward because you don't want to necessarily out yourself at the same time. So in terms of things that can be helpful, making it more commonplace to have gender neutral washrooms. I get really frustrated when I go into a washroom that was gendered and I realize that it is a sink, a toilet, a urinal, like all in one room. And you're just like, this had no reason to be gendered. This was just a room to go into. And I personally don't have a problem with there being gendered washrooms so long as there is also the option for gender neutral washrooms. I know other people have different opinions on that. And that's another thing, is the community is diverse, and so everyone's needs are different.
Yeah, I think it's interesting and unfortunate, I guess, how much our society does feel the need to gender things that really don't need to be gendered. Washrooms is one example, and certainly one of the most fraught ones for me and for lots of trans people or people who identify as anything other than binary cis individuals. But it's true of all kinds of different things. I mean, look at the school experience and how many people can think of a time growing up where they said, okay, boys go stand over there and girls go stand over there. And immediately look at what you're teaching the kids that you put through that experience, right? First of all, you're teaching them that there are only two options. You're teaching them that there are this group of people that are boys and this group of people that are girls. And then you start to assign things to those categories, that these ones get to do this or these ones get to do this. And the school and the peer group punishes people who vary from that, or people who cross those boundaries at all. A lot of coming to terms with my own transness was unpacking years and years of stuff that was trained into me in school and as a young person through harassment and trauma and all sorts of other things that just kind of piled on this sense of, that society does a really good job, especially people who are assigned. I'll speak from my own experience as somebody who was assigned male at birth. Society did a really good job of training people identified as boys not to transgress any of those boundaries. There were serious consequences for any sort of transgression of that gender boundary. And I internalized that to such a great extent that even when I was a queer person in my younger years and involved in LGBT activism and trans activism, I could support my trans friends, and I couldn't grasp what was happening in my own head or in my own being because of the layers that had been put on there. And I look at how many of the, in the States, I think they talk about them as the culture wars, but I look at how many of the culture wars are being fought over trying to defend these boundaries that only exist because for some reason we decided that sports needed to be divided up by gender and bathrooms needed to be divided up by gender and classes or professions or different experiences needed to be divided up by gender, and the pain that has caused to and continues to cause to so many people out there is I think one of the sort of the hardest parts and lasting thing for me of what cisgender privilege does to all of us.
I just want to clarify on something that Jade brought up. This goes in cycles. This has gone in cycles for many decades. Unfortunately, we are going through a time in the last week where the conversation has centered again on transgender women. This time in sports. I always pick something new to talk about. And so we all just need to be aware of the conversations that are going on. And some of them are impolite and rude. There is a very small justification for a constructive conversation on these topics, but most of the conversations are just not the right conversations to be having.
And so those who have the privilege and these difficult conversations or these rude conversations are happening, how might they use their privilege to help shift?
I always think the best way to shift conversations is either bringing up, actual facts and evidence that support the contrary, or falling back on information that you know to be true, or asking people where they're getting their information from, and trying to recenter the conversation around something that's helpful. Like, it can be hard when a conversation is not going in a way that's appropriate, and sometimes it's better to just stop the conversation where it's at and maybe reach out to that person at a different time and in a way that might be more constructive.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends what's going on also. Like, there's different environment. In some cases, if you're in a room of people who all identify as cisgender and you're making decisions around trans issues or around gender issues, maybe the role that somebody who is cis in that environment can play is to say what voice isn't in this room yet, and who's affected by these decisions, who probably should be being heard from. Or if you're in an environment where there is one trans person sitting there, and all eyes turn to them to try and see what their take on the conversation is, take a bit of that, to Kat's point, take a bit of that load on yourself and participate in the conversation, also checking with that person afterwards to what Kath was saying. But there is, like, I will say, just to kind of bring some lightness and hope to the conversation too. It's not all bad conversations, right? There are great things that are happening out there, and increasing openness and conversation even around things that simply weren't talked about 10 or 20 years ago, and weren't even, I didn't even know the conversation was missing yet. And so what I will say is that there is also such an opportunity for, my experience is that it's possible for a cisgender person to make my day very, very easily. The bar is at times so low that I'm not saying this right. What I mean is, it doesn't take a lot to make me happy. Recognizing me as feminine, when that is such a struggle for me at times to kind of get people to see, is enough to make my entire day. Today's International Women's Day when we're filming this. And I had a fellow staff person who I barely even know, whose boss had gotten a vase full of flowers for International Women's Day, and said, "Here, distribute these roses and give one to each of the women staffers," who came to my office and gave me one. And like that small gesture of kindness and recognition, it's just a simple act that blew me away and made the rest of my day.
It's a great story. It's a great story. So as we kind of bring our time to a close, is there anything that I should have asked or we should have touched on that we've missed? I mean, it's there's lots more I know that can be said, but would we be remiss if there was something that we didn't check off?
Like you said, there's probably 3 hours worth to go here, but I don't think people are going to keep watching. So, no, I think this has been good. Thank you.
This has definitely been good. I would just want to reiterate kind of some stuff that we already talked about around trying. And as Jay was saying, it is fairly easy to make these accommodations in some cases. And just be aware that even though you may not know that you're affecting someone, we just don't know where people are at in terms of understanding where they are in terms of their gender. And so these conversations and making these changes can help someone who isn't out yet and hasn't really realized what's been going on with them. So
one of the biggest pieces is to not make assumptions walking into a room about who you're encountering, but to leave lots of space. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both for being with us this day and for your willingness to share some of your story and risk. That's a gift, definitely, to each of us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
There is much to take in this interview. And as with all of the interviews we've done, one of the beauties of a recorded service is there is the opportunity to push that rewind button and to listen again to the depth and the concepts being explored. To live as someone of a diverse gender expression that is not part of that typical cisgendered means that one is often encountering folks who make all sorts of assumptions. So part of our responsibility for those of us who have grown up in the world in a way in which the way we identify fits the mold that typically society expects of us, we have a responsibility to use our power and our privilege to not only make room for those voices, but to help those feel seen, heard, and understood, and to do our own work at educating ourselves. Margaret's prayer about the gender-bending God invites us to think about both God and God's creation differently in just that simple term, gender-bending God, one who bends gender themselves and creates in the image of God a diverse people. When I first began ministry, even the notion of using feminine pronouns as a way of naming God was seen as anathema or anachronistic to many. Now, some 30 years later, hardly anyone blinks an eye as we use a multiple of metaphors to speak about the mystery of God. What would happen if we use that same kind of understanding to think about the mystery of God's creation and of human beings in all their great diversity? The story about the woman who anoints Jesus can also be seen through this lens. Everyone in the story has certain perceptions about what is the right or correct role for each of the genders in this story. The woman in the story is presumed to have crossed all sorts of boundaries, and she's admonished, not for being a person, but for being someone who has dared to cross those boundaries. Jesus, as he does throughout his ministry, stops stops the movement at that place toward judgment, and shifts the ground again. He sees her for her personhood. He sees the joy and the grace and the beauty that she is. He sees her, acknowledges her, and embraces her. As he did with all of his teaching, preaching, and a life lived, he did so in an inclusive way. It's our tradition when we celebrate communion to often begin with the words, "All are invited." And then we go through a litany of things, whether you're tall or short or somewhere in between, whether you're old or young or somewhere in between. Perhaps today the line when I say whether you're a male or female or somewhere in between perhaps has new meaning as a result of this interview this day. It is with gratitude and thanks to Kath and Jade and to all of you who are brave to share your stories that we close this day. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Don't make me over now that I do anything for you. Don't make me over now that you know how I adore you. Don't pick on the things I say, the things I do. Just love me with all my faults. The way that I love you, I'm begging you. Don't make me over now that I can't make it without you. Don't make me over. I wouldn't change one thing about you. Just take me inside your arms and hold me tight and always be by my side. If I am wrong or right, no, I'm begging you. Accept me for what I am. Accept me for the things that I do. Accept me for what I am. Accept me for the things that I do. Don't make me over. Don't make me over. Now that you've got me at your command.
As we end this day, may you feel loved, accepted, and seen for all the glory and diversity that you are and were created to be by the gender-bending God. Go into the world in confidence and in grace, in your true colors to shine. Amen.
What have you done today to make you feel proud?